Hello, my name's Tom Strutton and I'm an artist based in Southampton in the UK. The reason that I've made this video is to tell my Instagram followers a little bit more about myself, my background in the arts, and to give you some tips for your own drawings, especially if you're a beginner or an amateur in coloured pencil, watercolour or wildlife art. So I got into drawing at the age of 14 when I was at school. It was probably my favourite subject, GCSE art classes, and that wasn't to say that I didn't enjoy all the other classes at school. I found myself liking subjects such as music, history, English. In the UK system, we do need to pick several subjects to take forward to what we call A-levels, which is the subjects we study at age 16 to 18 before we enter higher education at age 18. And so naturally I chose to study A-level art, A-level history of art, and two other subjects. I think they were chemistry and classical civilization. So I found quite early on during my A-level studies at age 16 that I much preferred art and history of art to the other subjects. So these were the ones I focused on and subsequently discontinued my other studies. I absolutely fell in love with studying history of art, and it was excellent to sit every day studying various artists through the 19th and 20th century for all the main movements, and seeing the progression of Western art history from Impressionism through Post-Impressionism, Fauvism, German Expressionism, Cubism, Surrealism, Dada, Futurism, right up through to Abstract Expressionism and onwards. These were amazing times in my life, and it's where I really developed my passion for arts, or Western arts. Whilst studying history of art, I was obviously practicing my own art during A-level art classes, and I'd say what I did then is a far cry from what I'm doing now. And very much in the late 90s, early noughties, there was a culture within art and the study of history art at universities of, I suppose, very much modernism, postmodernism, and conceptualism in art. So it was very much turning away from illustrative, naturalistic approaches, although some people perhaps having success with photorealism at that stage is certainly a very different, I feel, very different scene to how it is now. And the success, if you were to continue your art studies through at university in the UK system, then your success would have probably been limited if you're a naturalistic artist, unless you're obviously a very high calibre. So that's the reason why I didn't study art at university, and I opted to study music and studied classical music at Royal Holloway, which is part of the University of London. But so during that time I did continue to do some of my own work. So I remember in the first year at university I studied music, but I would draw in my halls of residence, and I remember one of my drawings I did during that time, a pair of blue tips and a feeder. I think it's actually one of the first posts on my Instagram feed from back in 2004. That was one of the paintings I did whilst I was at university studying music. But I did have a period of about 8-9 years where, between university and leaning towards the present day, I didn't actually do any drawing at all. It just kind of fell by the wayside whilst I undertook other interests and pursuits. And it's not a period I particularly regret in my life. I'm definitely pleased that I have picked my passion up again. But what I will say is that one thing that's really helped me in the last few years has been the social media, and Instagram in particular, because having an audience, which I never previously had, is a huge motivating factor. And I'm sure I speak for a lot of people and a lot of artists on Instagram when I say that. I can speak for a sort of a collective voice of artists who have found renewed vigour in what they do because of being able to reach a much wider audience. So when I started drawing birds again around about 2.5 years ago, it was in part inspired by a family friend who commissioned some finches, and so I just picked up my pencil and said, yeah, I'll do that. And they came out not particularly great, but he was very happy with them. I think they were a family of 3 watercolour finches, and after that I thought, why stop, why not do some more birds? So I continued in watercolour mostly at that time, and some of my better works from that first year, I think 2.5 years ago, were a watercolour of a green kingfisher and a watercolour of a red wattlebird, which you can see on my Instagram account. And during that time, in my recent development, I definitely felt that was going to be, watercolour was going to be how I would proceed as an artist. But I first, I think, picked up coloured pencils after having seen some of the artists on Instagram and what they were able to achieve with coloured pencils, and just being blown away by it, really. I knew that oil wasn't for me. It's something that I'd experimented with in the past, but I was drawn to the coloured pencil work that I'd seen and thought I'd give it a go myself. I don't think the initial efforts I had were anything particularly great, but it didn't deter me, and I carried on with it. And I think that some of the work that I'm producing these days, and I feel like many people will agree with me, is going in a direction which is probably stronger than any of the earlier work that I've done. So I'm really encouraged by the comments and feedback that I get from everyone on Instagram. Thank you. And I've got some of the works here that I've done. This was one of the first owls I drew in coloured pencil. I use wildlifereferencephotos.com to obtain some of the photographs, my reference photos, and this one was from there. And it's weird, when I really started to think that I was finding a particular method that worked for me in terms of colour pencil, and following up with this owl here, again from wildlifereferencephotos.com, I was really encouraged after having finished this one that I was on the right track. And the most recent one that I've done was from my own reference photograph from a place down the road from us which looks after owls, and I managed to photograph one of their owls and did this drawing from it, which I'm really quite proud of. So that kind of brings me up to where I am at the present day, and I'm looking to, from now on, only work with my own reference photographs that I've taken myself with my Nikon camera. And I really hope to be producing a lot more birds over the, indefinite future, really, and I'll be looking to post all of my work to Instagram for the indefinite future. It's something I absolutely love doing, and hopefully I can make a career out of it, as some lucky people do one day. So moving on then to some tips I would give to amateurs and beginners, because I wouldn't presume to give tips to anyone that's far developed in their own work as professionals. If anyone is of that nature of watching this out of interest, that's fantastic, and thank you for watching it. But as I say, this is quite rudimentary stuff, and I really hope that the tips that I give will really help some of the beginners and amateurs out there. It's just things that I've not only picked up myself along the way, but have been taught and picked up at perhaps particularly in A-level art and art history classes. So the first tip that I'd give to anyone is to, if you really want to progress quickly in your art, draw a lot or paint a lot. And when I say that, I mean every day or every other day. And don't measure your progress in days or weeks, measure your progress in years. So say, this is where I am today. In a year's time, I'm going to be at this level, and in that year you'll have drawn or painted a great deal, because there's nothing like practice to really progress. And when you finish one work, or perhaps before you finish that one work, you already want to be thinking about your next work and what it's going to be, because you will look back on your work in a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and you'll be amazed at how much progress you've made just from sheer relentless work that you've been putting in. So that's my number one tip: draw a lot. My number two tip is choosing or making a reference photograph and the considerations that you put into it. So the number one consideration, whether you're taking the photograph yourself, or whether you're drawing from life, or whether you're choosing a photograph that someone else has made to make a reference from, number one tip is obviously think about the composition, and think about whether or not it's a good composition, whether it's one you're making or someone else is taking. So you're thinking about the lines, you're thinking about the shapes, you're thinking about whether or not it conforms to certain ideas of golden ratio, whether or not it's got a focal point. So think carefully about that, but also in terms of the actual picture and its technical difficulties, think quite carefully and hard about whether or not it's something that you feel like you can tackle and accomplish. I do feel quite strongly that sometimes, and I've been guilty of this in the past, people overstretch themselves when tackling a certain subject, and that can end in quite a lot of disappointment. The ultimate goal of creating a piece of work is to finish it with more confidence, knowing that you've done a great job on it. And I'm never one to throw away work. I only say that because I don't feel like I often stretch myself. I stretch myself by little increments each time. So I think when I choose something to work on, I don't ever know that it's not going to be achievable. I know in my mind how I'm going to tackle this bit, how I'm going to tackle that bit, how I'm going to tackle that bit. I never think, oh, it'll happen when I get to it. I'll just make it up as I go along. So yeah, when you're thinking about your composition or your subject, think about whether it's an interesting composition and whether or not you have confidence that you've got the tools at your disposal to do a good job on it. That's not to say don't tackle hard subjects, but try to be realistic. My third point would be to choose good tools to work with. So particularly in coloured pencil, people who aren't involved in the arts will sometimes say, oh, you work with coloured pencil, and they won't really have an understanding about how far coloured pencil technology has perhaps come since many years ago. And they're amazing instruments now. So definitely invest in good quality coloured pencils. There's a range out there, and you'll easily see on Instagram, you will have seen the types that coloured pencil Instagram artists use. So definitely worthwhile investing in a set. You don't need to go for the bigger sets, just the smaller sets are absolutely fine. Do encourage you to mix colours on the paper. It's something that they blend and do very well, so you don't worry about having a small selection of colours to work with. In terms of your pencils, they blend and mix very well. And in terms of paper, just experiment with different papers. I tend to choose a heavier paper and a smooth paper, as I press quite hard, and you're obviously in danger of damaging paper when you're using coloured pencils, as opposed to say watercolours, although it's not impossible to damage paper with watercolour. So yeah, choose good tools. As with anything, it will enable you to create better work. And my fourth point would be to practice patience. So one thing I was very guilty of in the past when I was younger was I wanted to get a piece done in one sitting very often. I wanted to sit down and 3 hours later have a finished piece of work. I think I knew even then that that was something that was holding me back from making good work. And I started to say to myself, why don't I stretch this over 2 days? Why don't I put it aside and come back to it tomorrow? And then slowly that developed into 3 days, and it's got to the point now where I spend perhaps sometimes 2-3 weeks, which is by no means a long margin, a long time compared to how some artists work. But for me then, I wouldn't have imagined I would ever spend 2-3 weeks, 4 weeks working on a piece. But yeah, practicing patience is a very good way of improving the quality of your work. If you've come up against a wall and you're finding you can't progress, just say to yourself, I'm not going to spend my usual amount of time on a piece. I'm going to spend longer on a piece. I'm going to put it aside, come back to it, put it aside, come back to it. And that's going to be the thing that helps me get over the wall and progress. And then my fifth and final point for today is to try and make every piece that you do better than the last one. So I've sometimes come up against the quite nice comment that wow, your work seems to get better and better, which is an absolutely lovely thing to hear. And I know that sometimes I do work which isn't up to my standard, but I definitely consciously try to make every piece better than the last piece. What is better? Well, you can define that yourself. To me, better is to elicit more dramatic responses, I suppose, from the people that view it. And so better is to become technically better at creating compositions, better at choosing or taking good reference photos, and better at getting good colours, good tonal values, good detail. And I want to make every piece I do more impressive than the last one. So I think it's a good attitude to have for anyone that's aspiring, is think, my next piece is going to be better than the last piece, my next piece after that is going to be better than the piece before. It doesn't matter if it's not, it's just something that can really help you, again, like the previous point, push past that hurdle in your development as an artist. So there's a bit about me and a bit about some of the things I think about that are good tips for people starting out. and I hope it's been really helpful, and in future videos I'd like to go into a bit more depth on any one of those subjects if anyone would find it of interest. So do comment on the YouTube or on my Instagram if it's been good to listen to this, and thanks very much for watching.